Welcome to Between Shelves.
where we make connections between literature, theology, philosophy, psychology, and culture.
Join us as we explore the interconnectedness of race, spirituality, psychology, and metamodernism.
Each episode invites you into a thought provoking journey, unpacking how these elements shape our understanding of the world and ourselves.
My name is Aaron Waldron. We're a religiously traumatized theopoet and a shaman in journey. Our work focuses on creating community and between spaces for religiously traumatized millennials, navigating life beyond colonized religion.
And my name is Rafael Reyes. My work is on the importance of imagination and theopoetics in philosophy and religious pluralism
We invite you to Between Shelves,
to learn
listen,
and become.
All right, welcome back and Happy New Year. 2025 is upon us, and we are back into the dialogue.
Well, welcome everyone. Like Aaron has said, Happy New Year to everyone. Great to have you back for our third podcast here. We're excited to have you. It's our fourth. Man, you're right. It is our fourth. I'm thinking in categories, and but you're right. This is our fourth time gathering together. So that's awesome. That's awesome. Um, that's great. So that means we started off by just talking and then jumping into race, modernity, post-modernity, and now we're talking about meta-modernity, right? So then, I guess a recap is in order. Just a quick one. I think the last time we spoke, we were talking about post-modernity and the values, but also some of the shortcomings of it, right? I'm reminded of Whitehead. He goes, for everything that we solve in a generation, new problems arise, and I think that that's apropos here. With what postmodernity was pushing back against in modernity, still problems arose with the opening up of identity. That there's a multiplicity of identity. It does introduce this crisis of identity. Who are we? What values do we hold on to? Um, you know this dynamicity of identities is like, really, is that all we are? Who are we really? And that could be troublesome when we think about it, right? Who are we really? Like, are we comfortable in that space? Are we comfortable always being in the in between, and that we're always shifting? And I guess for many that can jostle, and we can see this pushback towards maybe the more fundamental, going back to old values. um, but then metamodernity is introducing something else, right? I think another piece on postmodernity is, uh, let me see, I'm looking back at my notes, this hermeneutic of suspicion, which we become suspicious of everything. There's no meta narrative, there's no ultimate anything. And once again, it's this introduction of indigenous knowledges, of multiple knowledges, right? There's no one thing. Um, that is very helpful for us, but it also does introduce a question, and the question is, well, then what values do we hold on to? Do we all hold on to our own values, and then there's nothing we gather together around? That's a phenomenal question to explore, and I think metamodernity tries to engage with that in some way, right? And we'll look at that. And I think those are two key components. But truth, and I think if we talk about truth a little bit, truth, it becomes perspectival, right? So those indigenous knowledges introduce multiple understandings of truth, and then the question becomes, well, is there a universal truth, or is there some type of truth that is that we can ground ourselves on? I think metamodernity has an answer to it. Might not be what we are thinking about, but does provide an answer to it. And I think that's a good segue um, into thinking about metamodernity. Aaron, I don't know if you had any thoughts on that.
As you were describing and recapping, it was like, holy cow, like that's my life. Like we had a flash of just our awakening as a person, as a human being, and coming from an everyday citizen that had this strive to be successful, make money, be happy, things of that nature. And that was part of my identity. But then even for me, it was even more complicated because we're mixed between Cubano, Puerto Rican, Argentine, as well as having a various amount of Afrocentric, essence in us, background in us, our ancestors and whatnot. It was like, who are we really? Like, is this really what we are? And when we started pursuing that question, we started noticing, oh wow, like some other group has projected an idea of identity onto me and many other people like me. And it's for obvious reasons. It's for control. It's to keep people in certain areas, And I found this very interesting because the more we started to actually dive into who we could possibly be, because we didn't know, or we still don't know who we really are truly, but we start to see more fragments of possibilities. I think, like I could possibly be a poet. I could possibly be a writer, an author, a director, a father. All these things become now possibilities for me. That's how we saw it. And one of those possibilities was to be a shaman, a shaman in journey. And that was interesting because we were on the path of putting on the collar as a reverend. And we were very devoted and passionate about that because of the beliefs and the meanings behind that. And we wanted to be part of that. We felt like that should be part of our identity. But, the way that life happened, those passions and desires became traumas and then pushed us into a whole nother path of pursuing an identity as this kind of nomadic spiritual figure or symbol that's not necessarily accepted within religion, is not respected in various spaces, and is demonized in a lot of spaces. And even when people say, "Oh, you're not a shaman," like actually telling me my identity, that became something that I found really interesting as an observant person. I was just like, it's so interesting how people know who I am more than who they are, and had people telling me, "You're not that. You're male. You're this. You're that. You're a soldier. You're this." And so the list goes on, right? It's the many synonyms of who people think we are versus the possibilities of who we can be and who we decide to be today, right now, in this moment. That was also something powerful for me. We thought you had to go through some sort of ritual or initiation process, in order to become something, you know, and we were brought up this way. Everything we looked at was like, you got to go to school, you got to go to training, you got to be certified, you got to be registered, you have to go through all these things, and people have to pretty much verify or give you permission that you can be that safely, and be professional at it or whatnot. But then stepping into a role like being a shaman in journey is very like, I'm not part of society. Pretty much walked away and I didn't even realize it like that. I was very naive. Like, yeah, I'm a shaman in journey. Embrace me, and people are like, what the fuck are you? Like, what is that? Like, no, that's too much. I don't feel safe maybe, or it's confusing, or maybe based on my beliefs, that's demonic, So it became really hard, people started vanishing and we started thinking like, dang, is it me? And so you can already see like psychologically how that can have an effect on a person trying to develop their identity, and they're getting rejected a lot because they're not conforming, and it's a weird mind twist. And so, we kept going, and here we are standing on our own 2 feet today, and we're more proud of that decision than going back to conforming. It's not about me being better, but I honestly do feel more comfortable in my own skin because I've taken this path and I've began becoming, like Alfred Whitehead would say, Alfred North Whitehead. This idea of becoming, just love it because it's a process of developing identity,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
which we never really land there. We just are still constantly trying to Though I remember when I had my daughter, I went from being a college kid to being a father, like overnight. Kind of. She was born, and it was like she was in my arms, and then I couldn't go back. I couldn't go back to identifying as a kid and doing these reckless things. I had to take on a whole new identity. So, just an example of how life can, for any of us, affect our identities. And, if we fight it, we don't really ever become who we really are. It's not absolute, but it's kind of hard to tell people to let go, because let go is a very vague description or guidance. You have to learn for yourself how much to let go of what you think you are and what you think you're not. Like, a part of me was very traumatized by letting go of my Christian identity. I was born into that. That's all I knew. I had a lot of emotional value was invested in that. My mother compounded that shit into me. Like, you are Christian. We are Christian. Jesus loves us. They're just like, all right, mom, I love you. And if you love this, then I'll love this too. It'll be our thing, you know? And from a child's perspective, that kind of just, clings together. It makes sense. But as we get older, it gets complicated. It's like, why do I still have this chewing gum on the bottom of my shoe? It's not serving me. It's not doing anything. It's become just chewing gum on the bottom of my shoe. And it gets stuck to the ground every time I'm stepping. And I'm wondering, like, what the hell is making my steps so irregulated, discomforting, It could be a pebble or a piece of gum, but, theopoetically, symbolically, it's something that is just not serving you anymore. Not serving you like a jacket in when it's cold, or a rain jacket when it's raining. It's like, why do I have this? Why am I carrying this? What do you think about that?
No, when you're talking and while you're talking, just bringing that all in, I was, I had written some notes down just as you know, and I'm looking when I was like, man, it's really interesting that you're bringing this contextual experience, and because for me, it kind of situates this idea of two terms, and I'm going to use the term postmodernism and postmodernity, and follow me here. For you, it seems like you were saying, "Hey, I was in a time frame that really no longer fit for me, and I needed to look for something else." Whether if it was modernity and then you found postmodernity, or if you're in the postmodern space and you are looking then at a meta modern space, and I think it's important to differentiate the two, because when a lot of the times when we're reading and talking, having discussions, it's so important and valuable to see those nuances and those differences. And so that's what I was thinking about when you were talking. Is like you actually in a very contextualized experience broke those two down for me. Um, so if you don't mind, I kind of want to show what I had written down. I think we've been talking about these two different terms, postmodernism and postmodernity, um, because when we talk about metamodernism, there's it begins with metamodernism is a structure of feeling, and that caught me because I'm also I just started reading this book, Faith and Culture by Bernard Eugene Milan. It's an older text, and but in that text, he writes, page 202. I'm not getting geeky, everybody. I'm just gonna put in there. He goes, Schleiermacher and Whitehead have had a preference for feeling as the ultimate context. Feeling, and he's on point there. They talk about feeling. Metamodernism is a structure of feeling. Postmodernism is a structure of feeling, and what they mean by that, something that anticipates, something that precedes what becomes fully crystallized, right? So a lot of the stuff we're doing is feeling what we're experiencing, right? We're feeling something. It's like there's something different. And you said the chewing gum under the shoe. That's feeling, right? There's this feeling that's there. It's like this is uncomfortable and I need to move on to something else. But I want to say when you got to the mother, she says, no, you just have to do it. Postmodernism is that structure of feeling of proceeding, but postmodernity is that feeling is now concretized and crystallized in everyday life. That's the gum under the shoe that people are walking on and are now getting uncomfortable and are saying, okay, this doesn't feel right. I'm on to something else. I need to do something else. And so I hope you got that part where I'm like, oh yeah, that's postmodernity, that's postmodernism. And it segues into modernism. Um, all of the things we're talking about at one moment were structures of feeling, right? This feeling like we need to, what are our values? What should we be focusing on? We've gone too much the other way. How should we be thinking now, right? So if we look at postmodernism, they were actually critiquing modernism. He goes, why are we all united in this one? It's hiding capitalism, is hiding colonialism, is hiding all these things. We need to break away from that. Be honest, be truthful. Let's, what is it hiding? What is it keeping us from? And we found value in it, but now we're introducing new problems. Now we're saying, oh man, we've gone too far on the pendulum of the other side. What do we do now? Right now, we're fully in postmodernity, in which we're feeling every social experience is defined by that postmodern thinking that's in place. Capitalism has taken over it, right? And it's like now everything's differentiated, everyone's hyper individualized. There is nothing that is combined. Everyone has to individually do this. Everyone has to individually do that. So 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 you know, the technology and the businesses and the frameworks have taken advantage of postmodern thinking and used it against us, if you will, right? It has both goods and bads. And we've lost certain values. um, for instance, if I create a company that's looking to only make money, I lose the fact that I'm part of a community, and that a business is always meant to serve a community, not to serve my needs, but to serve everyone's needs, right? Um, that gets lost. That gets lost because I have to make sure the shareholders who have invested, if I make it public, and make sure that their values are met. Uh, a, a, a prime example of someone that goes against that is Costco. You saw in the news, Costco says, "Hey, then the shareholder says we should move away from DEI," and it says, "Respectfully, we heard what you said, but we find it pivotal to our success that we maintain DEI." That's actually countering um, that hyper individualization, countering this hyper framework in which we don't care, we don't have morals, we don't have this, we only want to make the dollar, the almighty dollar. And they're saying no, that there's value in this. There's value in this. Um, and it breaks away, it breaks away from that. So there's, this idea that postmodernity has fully infiltrated in a negative fashion in some of these areas. We now have a new feeling, right? There's a new spirit. Maybe there's a new haunting, if we want to use a Marxian term. But for me, I first heard it in one of Catherine Keller's texts. This idea of haunting and the spirit of which I'm always grateful for. There's this new spirit, there's this new structure of feeling that we're trying to crystallize, and it comes in the term metamodernism. Um, and it begins with metamodernism is a structure of feeling. It is a feeling. It's an ethos. It's a culture that's forming that we need to be listening to, and not only listen to, but turn it into a hermeneutical tool to now see through. And that's like the first part. Metamodernism doesn't have any labels right now. We're still forming it, right? It's still formulating ideas as to what it is. Um, so it's nothing fully defined, and yet we see certain principles that are kind of in play. There's certain principles that are in play. Um, and I wrote down a couple of terms that are there, but the one that always catches me is this term of that one of the guiding principles of meta-modernity is that there's an oscillation. Oscillation. So, I think of oscillation maybe as that eight, the eight, that universal principle of it's going now. Or you could think of the pendulum back and forth. I kind of like the eight a little bit better, but that is so pivotal and critical for me. Um, and This book here, excuse me, Meta-Modernism and the Return of Transcendence by A. Severin, edited by Dempsey. Dempsey is uh, someone that's been writing heavily and rehashing or rebringing out a lot of authors and synthesizing it or bringing them all together to talk about it and it as how it engages with culture and religion. But but this term of oscillation and going back and forth, of looking at both modernity and postmodernity, and saying that it seeks one, knows that it can't only survive there, and goes back. So, for instance, postmodernity sort of had a loss of values, or saying we're not going to get values from this one particular group or this universal group, and we kind of find it in our own. But then it says our own values also need central values or values of a group. So now it oscillates back. It has to go back to, well, what group can I go to that has values that maybe somewhat align or that engage what I'm thinking, right? It helps me to grow. Okay, but then what do I think? And so then there's this back and forth movement that's happening. But that's not the interesting part of oscillation that you see meta-modernity doing, because it's not the either or. Like it's either this value or this app value. They say it's the both and that's the beauty of what I see this oscillation going to. It doesn't synthesize. This is an interesting part. It doesn't synthesize. It's saying both and. I want to think of the word matrix here. Let's keep that. Let's take matrix and put it. I'm not talking about the movie. I'm talking about the term and what it means when we look at it, maybe in categorizations and all that stuff. And I'm going to put a pin on that. It's not synthesizing from a Hegelian sense. Um, if there's any Hegelians on there, you might combat me. I understand. But I always had a problem with dialectics in that sense, that type of dialogue from Hegelian, because you have thesis, antithesis, synthesis, but hidden inside of that, the thesis always wins. It's never I let go of my thesis, right? Um, it's not going to be 40% thesis, 60% antithesis to get the synthesis. Most likely my thesis will continue. I will grab or assimilate that which comes out of my antithesis so that my synthesis is strong. My thesis is stronger, and I call it synthesis. It's sort of like that Star Trek assimilation of the Borg. I take what's best, and I grow, and I become champion. To say both and honors. I say it's both. You can't do one without the other. That is, that there's something to that. I would almost argue it's different. That is different from synthesis. It's different from the term reconciliation. It's not reconciling. It's not a reconciliation. That's a religious term and a Christian term, and then that's that's something we have to reckon with. Reconcile, reckon. Oh. And it's different from harmony. Both and is different from all those, and oscillation is different from all of that. And once again, I want to take this example from the text, because I thought it blew my mind, because it's like, yes, that's how it would be. The book said, if you think about an LED light, and he goes, not just a regular LED, but it's the one that's spinning, and then the LED lights show, and it could do words and everything like that. So if you think about that, it creates the illusion almost of the words. It creates it in out of thin air. Um, but he goes, what you're doing is you have an oscillation going on, and it's in within that oscillation, within those that revolving, that something arises, something emerges out of it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's what Alfred North Whitehead, Catherine Keller, Roland Farber say about this, using a field of force, or the many becoming one, increasing by one. We have this sort of creativity that comes being between the two, and seeing what arises out of it. To say you can't, that creativity, or what arises out of it, or the identity arises out of both of them at the same time, oscillating, going back and forth between the two, and that it's never one or the other. It's not an either or. That's mind blowing to me. John Sallis, Force of the Imagination. That's another text. He talks about the imagination, and he says what the imagination does is that it takes everything within it, and it pushes it all together in the most tightest sense. And he does this distinction. He goes, but as tight as they are, they're all separated. But he says you look at it topographically, you hover over it to see what it looks like. And he goes, after the imagination, what's left is that they're still separate, but you were able to see it together and realize some image, something that arises out of that, which creates a vision, which creates possibility to move forward. And it's not concretized, not at all. Whether it's identity, whether it's a vision for some plan or anything, it's not concretized at all. That comes by way of process of moving forward. But there's a beauty to that. I think that's somewhat of an oscillation topographical. It's like this in and out, this in and breaking. Gaston Bachelard does the same thing. He goes, once you hit the ceiling breaks, and there was nothing really there, but what we have is what we learn from it and what we gather from it, right? We can stop the oscillation. I could stop that oscillation forth. And the thing no longer is there. But what you got from it is powerful. What you got from it is powerful because it's that back and forth movement. It's not saying it only is this or it only is that, but requires the back and forth of both. That's why it's different from synthesis. Synthesis probably has a feeling of coloniality in it. Harmonizing is it could be there, but I don't know what that harmony would look like. Reconciliation sort of like is coming back, but is that true what we see in oscillation, you know? And I would almost say that maybe it's more akin to harmony than the other ones. But even so, oscillation is something really fascinating, groundbreaking for me, but things that I've been seeing from writers like I mentioned before, Roland Farber, Catherine Keller, even Alfred North Whitehead in his own writings. They've been, I think, for me, I see them theologically as forerunners of that. And so that oscillation is so valuable for meta-modern thinking and meta-modernism there. I think that's one of the guiding principles that I hold on to. I don't know if you had any thoughts.
Hey there, listeners. Dr. Waldron here. If you're enjoying the deep dives in today's conversation, we've got something that might interest you. Throughout this podcast, we mention a variety of books that align with various themes, concepts, ideas, as well as theopoetic, symbolism. Whether we're talking about metamodernism, psychology, spirituality, film, or even philosophy, by using the Amazon affiliate links we've provided in the episode description, not only can you get your hands on these books quickly and easily, but you'll also be supporting this podcast project at no extra cost to you. It's simple. It's a really simple way to show your support and help us continue bringing thoughtful, enriching content your way. So the next time you're curious about a book we discuss, click the link in the show notes or in the description. And thank you for helping us keep this journey going. With that said, let's get back to the dialogue. Yeah, as you were talking, thank you for that. We were thinking from our film perspective because we love film so much. The film called Moonlight in 2016 was published. For anyone that's not familiar with Moonlight, it is a film that portrays the evolving identity of a young person of color, or you could say black, a male, across three pivotal stages in his life. It emphasized how relationships, environment, and self perception shape our identity, our journey of self discovery. And it's interesting because in this film, the character is oscillating between opposing forces as well as oscillating between different identities. So for example, in the beginning of the film, the main character's name is Chiron, and as a young man, he was navigating sexuality, and he really didn't have a father figure. His mother was struggling with shifts as a nurse and as well as battling depression and drugs. It's a really interesting tale because his mother's drug dealer ended up being his mentor, like a dad figure.
Okay.
And so, it's really interesting. But the young man finds himself, not being heterosexual, basically, in layman's terms. And he's not attracted to those things that heterosexuals are attracted to, which is majority everyone around him. The society and his environment looked at him and said, you should like women, you should like girls. But he wasn't interested in those things. He found himself falling in love with his best friend, which made it even more complicated. And then there's another part of his life that he's in prison and he gets out. That's towards the end. And then he's trying to reconnect with his best friend from school back in the day that he still has feelings for. And thinking about it, like as you watch this film, the character physically changed, obviously, because of age. But when he got out of prison, he was just so like muscular and, like he really worked out heavy a lot. And when he got out, he wasn't like trying to be with a woman or anything. He was all by himself. And he was just in his head a lot. And as a child, you see in the film, he was daydreaming a lot. And we see this with Freud and Carl Jung when they talk about the early developmental stages of the psyche as well as archetypes, how they're forming. When you have a traumatized child, a traumatized, hurt child, they tend to daydream a lot because they're trying to escape their environment. So in the film, it was demonstrating that. And we thought that was just so powerful. As we're talking about a meta-modern piece, this film didn't like slap on meta-modernism as advertisement, but it's a meta-modern example of how we can look at feelings, like you're saying. And this young man had feelings from his early development through his prison development, through his young adult development. And it was something that he just couldn't find answers anywhere in society. But it seemed like he found these answers for himself with his best friend. And in the end, they kind of like connect, and it kind of gives you this illusion that he kind of made himself whole again, or made something out of the chaos and all these things. So yeah.
That's powerful, that we go back into this idea of feelings in trying to find identity, right? And finding values in other areas. That's so critical of metamodernism, um, because we're looking for patterns, right? And these patterns uh, are valuable to metamoderns. Patterns become values that shape who we are, and we continue to feel. They we're trying to use not only our intellect in metamodernism, but also a return to using our sensibilities, our senses. And that's where feeling becomes so important, right? It's not only thinking through things, but feeling through things. Um, and I think a key piece that you're highlighting from that film is identifying some certain sensibilities, like certain feelings, certain emotions that are important, and then understanding the motivations behind it, right? So you're saying, looking at the way the home was, daydreaming comes into play, looking at these motivations as to why things are happening, to get a sense of what's going on, and not saying this is because of this and that's it, right? So there's not like this hard causation, but that there's something much more in depth going on, with a lot more senses and everything like that.
And another film that pops in my mind is it called Arrival? Have you seen that one?
Yes, great film.
Published 2016. Yeah, that was an interesting one. It kind of flew under the radar when you think about it. It doesn't pop out as like a meta-modernism example film because it's in sci-fi, right? It has to deal with the visiting of extraterrestrial and time travel. But when we look at it, hanging on to the concept of feeling, especially in the meta-modern space, you notice that the female, the main character, the linguist, she was oscillating through time, her own timeline, to gather information and make sense of it. But the interesting part about it, when she was learning the extraterrestrials' language, which is different from ours, it was non-linear. It was actually in a circular pattern, meaning it had no real timestamp. So past, present, and future wasn't separate in their perception of reality. And you saw that in the language. But when she started understanding the language, she adopted this pattern of oscillating, I would say. Well, I could argue that the extraterrestrial offered her basically a pattern to oscillate, like oscillate like this, and you'll see things different. Because like you're saying, if oscillating is just a mere continuous movement between everything and all inclusive, then it's just a matter of how do we move through the oscillation that we get different results. And this film kind of hints at that, saying or suggesting that if you look at your life and oscillate through different times, you see you have different identities, you have different values, but what do you pull from those to gather to get what you want in that moment that you need? And I think in the movie, the moment was trying to prevent the next world war, nuclear fallout. And she had to prove to, I think it was China, Korea, the leader, that, the technology that the extraterrestrial was sharing was not meant to be used as a weapon for humanity, and we should not be afraid, but we should learn that we can adapt from this. We can evolve from this. This could help us in tremendous ways. What do you think? What are your thoughts from that film?
So that film is a fabulous film. It's one of my favorites. I keep watching that one over and over because I keep gaining new insights from it. I can stay on this for the rest of the podcast. So let me at least say it's not only holds to this notion of meta-modern oscillation. I think there's a couple of things that happens there. I think it does also talk about um, informed naivete, which is another meta-modern thinking. Like we're informed, we have information, we have all this stuff, but when we engage, we're engaging sort of like anew, right? Um, I think it is about reconstructing things to see things in a different way and not deconstruct as danger, right? And I'll get to that in a moment. And it talks about both and thinking. I think those are the key pieces of metamodernism: oscillation, informed naivete, reconstruction, feeling, and both and thinking. Um, but when we look at that film, there's a number of different oscillations, right? One is the one that you talked about is once she acquires the language and how they think, right? Once again, now you have this idea that everything how we think and everything we think about is based off of the language that we have. Um, So we have a Willem Flusser, someone that believes language is everything, and so then everything is done through language. You have other philosophers and thinkers that say, no, there's much more to it than just language. There's more to it, because, well, you forget about feeling and you forget about other nuances in there. So you could talk about it, but that's not the point here. Um, with the introduction of that language, like you mentioned, there the past, the present, and the future doesn't have the gravitas or the weight, right, we once had. I think because we think linearly, we put a lot of weight on our past. Religion has a lot of weight on its past and say, hey, like maybe in Eastern Orthodox religions and in Catholic religions, tradition is everything. Endpoint. And we see that also in a lot of Protestant spaces, that our history is so important, our traditions are so important. In the film Arrival, and when we think about it in a meta-modern way, it's saying it's not diminuted. It's valuable and it's so important, but in a different way, because when we're trying to find answers, we reach into our past. We can dip into our future to bring out a very pragmatic or response, and we construct everything in that time to come up with a response. And so I can oscillate back and forth to come up with a response now. So we're not deconstructing. We're not saying tradition is everything. We're saying, no, we're constructing. We're reconstructing. Our history has a different value and a new value to us. Our future can be reconstructed, and and there's, I think in Arrival there's a meaning saying the value is in the fact that you go through all of it, because it's so much, it's so rich, and one receives experience, right? um, and that is in and of itself the gift that we get from it, and we gain value from it. So you have that type of oscillation. I think there's another form of oscillation that goes on between the linguist and the mathematician, and I think that is even more just as concrete as the other one, because it talks about, hey, here's the hardcore mathematics and how we understand relationship. And then she's a linguist, and she goes, well, I understand a different way of relating, right? And he would come at it by way of mathematics and using technology and computer systems, and she comes at it by way of engaging. I think that's a prime example of that informed naivete, that informed naiveness, um, that even though, perfect example, when the army sergeant came to us, can you tell me what this is about? Well, she goes, I can't. I need to listen. I need to hear it. I need to be in the room. That's experience, pure and simple. That's being there, being present. I have to start from the beginning, right? Naiveness. But she's been informed. She has years and years and years, decades probably of practice, of maybe guiding principles of how do you structure language and how do you develop language, how do you find meaning. And here you have a bunch of technicians, but if we single out the man, I forgot who it was, but the mathematician, technology, um, mathematical principles, to see relationships as well. He also sees relationships. He's fully informed, but he must move in the form of naiveness. Naiveness leads to inquiry. Naiveness says what I'm informed and what I'm knowledgeable of is nothing when I engage this new thing. And so I would say it's not diminuting and it's not marginalizing anything. Meta-modernity does not marginalize anything, but it says all of this is valuable, so that when we engage, I can oscillate back and forth with that new information that I have, and reconstruct and build, maybe build to something more, provide alternatives. That's so powerful. And so that contributes to both and thinking. That both and thinking is killer, man. It's And this is where I want to bring in the matrix. Remember, I pinned it there. I pinned it in the beginning of our podcast. I want to bring it down. Um, the matrix, which you could sort of say is a box that has the categories and has these things. And I'll let you know right now, when I say that, the image that I'm seeing is in Roland Farber's book, God as Poet of the World, and how he explains it. Here is this matrix of these different things and these nuances. But the goal is not to say, okay, this is it. It's all of them. It's not one of them. It's all of them. And so you're forced, when you see it, to oscillate and move around. I like something that you said earlier, because I said oscillation as sort of like this or as a pendulum. You said oscillation is finding how to maneuver between all the things. That's beautiful, man. That's the chef's kiss right there. I love that, because you introduced that maybe the oscillation is a dance between all of the that's what both and thinking is, kind of about this dance on how to maneuver through all of it. But it's not one thing. It's that matrix. You're forced to kind of have to see it all. I don't know if you've seen that illusion of the image that when you look at it, it's constantly moving and changing. It's sort of that. It's both a still image and a moving image. And it's what's in between all of that you're going to find that newness. Um, I kind of want to say, and going back to the film, The Arrival, you have that. It's with her ability. So I don't know if you noticed, she uses these ways of engaging um the alien species, the other, that others would be like, you're crazy. But she has to remove the suit. She goes, this technology doesn't work here. Safety doesn't work here. And I need to be transparent. I need to reveal who I am. I need them to sense me and I need to sense them. And there cannot be any of these things. And she's able to touch the glass. She's able to put a drawing on it and says, this is who I am. This is my name. And then they're able to sort of, when we do mimicry, sort of speak. Oh, that's how they talk. Okay, then let me. But that type of involvement, and that's an oscillation. That's a back and forth. That's sort of like engaging, and they come in as equals. A deferment of judgment. Um, Alfred North Whitehead, Religion in the Making. When you come in as a stranger, you defer judgment, and you learn from one another. That's an oscillating type of thinking, and that you leave forever changed. You can no longer think the way you used to think, because now you have both of them in mind. They're both and. Um, but on top of that, or with that, it's not on top, with it, both and thinking, you have the mathematician recording everything and is able to, in his own way, see relationships. Um, so here's another piece about metamodernism, not metamodernity, metamodernism. There's a dimensionality, there's a transcendence that's there. Metamoderns are looking for transcendence. They're looking for something beyond. I think that's the critique of postmodernity. Postmodernity let go of any type of meta narrative, and then you sort of like, you got to search for your own values. Metamodernism is saying, no, there's got to be some values. There got to be some dimensions. There's got to be some transcendence. Um, in the same way, in Arrival, he's able to look at it and transcend not only these meanings, but there's more to it. You know, there's these other parameters. There's this deepness, right? It's sort of like what we get with numerology or looking at music and deafness and all that. There's these dimensions to things. There's this deepening that's there. And really they're alternatives, right? They're not 100%, but they're alternatives, and allows us to see in different ways and engage it in different ways. um, Maybe not looking at it in a mathematical way, but looking at it in depthness, looking at it from a different form of relationship, looking at it from the perspective of the Russian group, or the perspective of the Asian group, or the perspective of the other countries, because there were 12 of them. So this forced engagement of both, and that there's others, and I need to think the way they think, because each one of them are giving me um, different frameworks of thinking. Some of it is not wrong, is, it's kind of heavy, but it's coming from that context. But it gives me insight to say, but is that really what it's about? It's maybe the revelation that we all think different because of the context that we come from and the heaviness of it. But it's possible to reconstruct it to something more valuable, something that honors others to both and thinking. Um, so I'm in a way, I'm also reconstructing the arrival, because it might not have been all of that, but what I see it from metamodernist perspective, right? Metamodernism perspective of me trying to make sense of the film and how it relates to the world. Uh, but with that, metamodernism is powerful in what it's trying to do, because it's trying, definitely, I don't want to say reconcile no more. It wants to oscillate those two worlds and say, I can find value, I can provide alternatives, and I want you to see, right? I invite you in to see what that is, which is a pushback against any form of hyper individualism to some type of community, right? To some type of formation of values. But it's still there. You can see my individuality, and we can see it in community. Um, there is informedness, right? There is this, we have so much information. We can't lose that. We can't lose that of who we are. But I still come in with a form of inquiry and newness and adventure. Um, and the goal is to even reconstruct the self in terms of identity. um, and that comes in by the way of, when the female is using that language, she's starting to see past, present, and future. We don't see it until much later. That's what's going on, but that comes because we accept the other as other into ourselves, right? Deferring judgment, not it, not and that way. I think that speaks to, and I'm not, but I think that speaks to this question of race a little bit, right? On that. So I kind of want to pause. I've been talking so much.
You're on a roll, man. The two things that came up while you were talking actually inspired me to think about it. One piece is to add on to your analysis of the movie Arrival. The two characters, the male and the female, which their names escape me, but for sake of the dialogue, it's the linguist and the mathematician. It's interesting how theopoetically we see the linguist was a female and the mathematician was a male, and it's interesting that these two characters have characteristics that are similar to masculine and feminine, or masculine and femininity, which is found in both are found in all of us. But it's interesting how you see the female character is the one that says, I need to connect.
Mm-hmm.
I need to, go beyond the technology. And the mathematician perhaps maybe favors the technology because logically it's like we've been compounding and building upon these are advancements, right? That's how we understand it. So why would we not use it? But then, like you were saying, you were alluding to, is the female, the linguist, she goes back to a very primitive technology, our five senses. Like you're saying, the feeling is part of the five senses, but she needs to hear it. She needs to be in the room. She needs to see body language. She needs to see all these things that her biological technology is blocked by if she's in a hazmat suit and she can't use these senses. And in a weird way, we see it also as like by wearing the suit, you're symbolically showing fear. You're afraid of your environment by wearing the suit. Her, on the other hand, she's showing like, I want to be one with my environment. I want to be natural, organic. This can go many ways, but you see what we're saying here. Like in the movie, I don't know if they meant to do this, but it really plays out. I don't believe it's a coincidence that she plays a female role, and her colleague who becomes her husband, um, or co-parent, is a male, and comes from this, logical 1 + 1 = 2 every single time. And she's like, well, maybe we need to rethink this. I think there's something else. And then you got, like you said, the military, which is also an epitome of logic, right? Like, military strategy.
Epitome of logic, epitome of patriarchy,
Of
everything.
course, of course. But more importantly, to highlight this example, the military being this predictable thing. We were talking about, I think, 2-part dialogues ago. Predictability and unpredictability, right? She's going a route that's unpredictable, and the mathematician and the general or the military is going a predictable route. You even see it when the general is like, look, I need tangible results. I don't have time for this maybe or whatever theory or spirituality even. I need to report to the president. I need something hard, real, materialistic, that can be measured, because I have people that are judging me upon these things. I need to produce, right? These things. And she's just like, well, it's not like that here, especially because we're dealing with other, and we're not familiar with other, this whole process, or maybe even a process of oscillating empathy, trying to understand other, like, why did you come? What are you trying to share? Because even through the movie, they're like, did you share a weapon with us? Why would you do that? And all these things, and trying to uncover that they're from our perceived future. And by us knowing this ahead of time, we can, avoid something catastrophic that affects them. And it's really interesting when we look at that kind of perspective of the movie, the story, where these other beings from a different timeline jump to our timeline to, share this, to suggest that if we didn't share this with you, we were going to perish, and it kind of, as a viewer of the film, you kind of step back and say, wow, the whole time I've been rooting for the humans, but it's not even about the humans. It's about the others. And they came back not to reconcile, but they came back to oscillate, right? To get something done or bring something from the past or whatever have you, to share it so that the future can look different, and not in a tragic way, but in a better way, So I just wanted to add that, because I thought that was really interesting. I was like, oh, I didn't notice that the figures themselves can represent these masculine and feminine roles, you know, like femininity being a reflection of wisdom, patience, passionate, like a mother. And then the logic being, like logos, masculine, powerful, action orientated, right? We just take action, just let's do it, do it, do it, do it. And the female is like, well, let's think about it. So you're right. Bringing these two together, it's like a hidden message of saying, like, for all of us, action's great, but we also have to consider, these other things. And especially now, bringing it into real life. When we live in a society right now in America that's predominantly hyper patriarchy, hyper masculinity, we don't have the luxury, for the most part, to feel. Everything's happening all at once, and it kind of just numbs us, like, I don't know, but not to be all morbid or anything like that, but it's just a reflection of just how we see the people and how we engage with people, strangers in the community, and people are just numb, and if we wanted to go back to a point where we feel, you would see more artistic expressions and more vibrancy and things like that. But there's so many things in place that seem to be countering that. And I'm sure this is not, news, this is old. This has been happening for so long, the oppression of anything feminine, anything that's related to femininity is definitely oppressed, because, they realize that if we have this component engaged in our life, we're not as controlled. It's weird, right?
Yeah.
But if they isolate us and keep us divided, even within ourselves, dividing our masculine and feminine, and we are acting hyper masculine, like a child just running through the woods, is how I envision it. Like, that's the epitome of masculinity. Like, this quick action, strong, endurance, capable, but aimless. Where are you going? and without the feminine piece helps us identify ourselves, even sit down and consider, like, who am I? Who do I want to become? I always think of like a mother role, and how a healthy mother role, and how they're considerate of their children. Who do you want to become? What do you want to do? I want to support you. But if you have a father that's just hyper masculine, you'll get results that are like, this is what you got to do. You got to go do this. Let's go. I'm signing you up. Like, you got to work. You got to physically produce labor. Like, and these are not coincidences. They overlap. And we can see them in fragments in our own lives, in our own society, of like, yeah, you're right. Like, we're battling, we're oscillating between masculine and feminine, even in our own lives, in ourselves. And when we are trying to become, these things are present, but it's challenging because nothing outside of us is helping us navigate this stuff. Our education system is not contributing to helping us think about these things for ourselves. And so, like, it becomes very complicated when we become adults or even parents, and it's kind of just sprung up on us. Like, I didn't even think about that. And then it's just this rabbit hole of unraveling that can be really traumatic. Like, I know a lot of people talk about awakening and becoming, self-identifying is so liberating and great, and it is, but the reality is it's traumatic. It really is, because you're breaking away from an old way of thinking. You're breaking away from something that was like an umbilical cord, you know? And like, now you got to think, well, how do I survive without being fed? Like, becoming self-sufficient is a scary thing. It requires community. We're beginning to understand, we're still learning, but there's so many things that we've come so far to think about in terms of identity that it's like, we can't do this by ourselves. Maybe the oscillating also is with people, like, it's a very, like you're saying, a multi-dimensional thing where the oscillation is not binary. It's just so it's like we're looking at some sort of shape that has infinite sides. You know?
Yeah. I use, well, I first heard it from Roland Farber. He wrote in his book on an introduction to process thought, process theology. He goes to fields of force, a field of force which is all around, right? And so whatever's in there, that's what you got, right? So it comes from multiple angles. It's not a binary, even though we tend to think binary because it's simpler for us. But I think to have a field of force is rather interesting, just because whatever's bound within that space is what we deal with. And it's contextual, right? You can't have I mean, even if you would say the field of force is the universe, well, that's still very contextual, very wide context, but it's still contextual. And then when you start thinking smaller and smaller, the field of force small, that gets more more contextualized, but it is there, and like you said, it's how to oscillate and dance within there. um, and with that, I'll just share that as you were talking, realizing, uh, I think you're right. I mean, you can bring in masculine and feminine tendencies, qualities, in that, the aliens came in pairs. Talk about this circular, and their language is circular. It's full. It's almost in forms of harmony, yin yang. If you wanted to do it with bringing that full circle in, um, you know. But when you see talks on the army side in the United States, they're mostly fully masculine, with only I just looked it up, Dr. Louise Banks, if I'm not mistaken. Um, the only one actually that's a doctor. The other ones don't have doctors. The mathematician's name is Ian, and he doesn't have a doctor in front of him. So that's interesting for me. There's this play. There's something there on that. But nevertheless, um, she's the only probably feminine female there, fighting to say, hey, there is this other perspective. I would just wanted to say that, as a Puerto Rican, My wife is doing studies on Taino studies, and one of the things she does is a story. One of the stories of how the oceans and the island of Puerto Rico began, or the islands began, and the golden flower, the story of the golden flower. You have this feminine and masculine characteristics at not they weren't warring with each other. I mean, you could take it as that. They weren't warring, but they came about the flower in a different way. One asked us to explore, to question, but the other one forced us to act. And it's always a fight between the two. The rivers didn't become unless there was an action done upon it. The question is always, could it have been done in a different way? Listen, what do you hear? What are you hearing? What does it sound like? As opposed to the other one to say, well, what's inside of it? It's an interesting engagement there. Um, I will say to bringing in metamodernism, you know, looking for richness, looking for values, looking for a culture is important, and we're looking for a depthness or an alternative to what's out there. That's definitely something that metamodernism is bringing in, that I do see happening in the films, right? Whether it was Moonlight or Rival, even Everything Everywhere All at Once. You know, we didn't get to talk about that. It's there as well. You see that these are looking for value, are looking for importance when coming out of the postmodern framework, and everything's deconstructed and everything's hollowed out, saying, well, then what do I got left? You know, um, we're looking for something that transcends us, brings another dimension to things, in which we're starting to see new integral spiritualities, these integration of religions and pushback, right? I think meta-modernity is also introducing a pushback to maybe older ways. So we can see a rise of conservativeness, a rise of fundamentalism as a way of responding to a meta modern. Like, oh, we've lost our values. And then we have this other side, which is more progressive and saying, I don't know if we can go to the back to the past, but past is valuable for me, right? And we can learn from it, and we can move forward to something new. Um, I think that's what we're getting out of meta modernism, the new, um, and I want to say that, you know, looking at some progressive thinkers, I want to still lift up, you know, those that I've read that I said, well, these were meta modern thinkers outright, and I would like to throw them into the meta modernism space. You know, Roland Farber and Catherine Keller, as two key authors from me that are saying they're meta-modern thinkers. But I would even almost go back to, you know, Alfred North Whitehead, who was thinking beyond what was there. I mean, that he was speaking a different language to people. Um, he was talking about alternatives, you know, the alternative ways, really opening up a field within religion and science and mathematics and metaphysics, that we're still unpacking now. I mean, if you know, a lot of the critical work that's being done, it's like, can't believe he's saying this. You know, it's like this guy's ahead of his time. So with that, you know, there's this feeling that's been there for quite some time, uh, and is now rising the stage, probably because, you know, the right ingredients were there. The chewing gum under the shoe no longer is feeling right. Doesn't feel right anymore. So we're and we're trying to see, well, what is it? What is it? Because this fit for a bit, but not anymore.
This was an awesome dialogue. Of course, we could talk about this for hours, but we're excited. We're working diligently to work on some new upcoming episodes that will include guests, some amazing guests, and we're looking forward to having those dialogues. So look forward to that. They will be extensions of this dialogue so that we can go even deeper, maybe even grasp some depthiness from this concept and idea of oscillating between metamodernism and identity, race, gender, culture, So please like, subscribe, share. Look out for the next upcoming episodes who will have guests with us, some amazing guests. And on that note, is there anything else you want to say to close out, Rafael?
Just thank you for joining us, and looking forward to what's happening next. Definitely setting a ground for the discussions we're having in the future, and I'm excited for what we have. More to come. More to come.
More to come. More to come. We are working hard to keep this thing going. And again, Happy New Year.
Yes.
May the new year bring abundance, prosperity, and emotional connection. We all need it. So on that note, we'll see you in the next part of the dialogue.